evening with a sneak peek of I Am Delivered, of course, by our own Jonathan Norton. In this scene, which takes place on the church parking lot, Sis, the vice president of Usher Board number 1, played by Yolanda Adams, is reunited with her ex, Breedlove, played by Janine K.
Oh, yeah. Are you still married? Ooh, your marriage is falling apart. Just leave it alone. Stay out of my business. Your fault here. Stop it. Ain't no judgment. Regardless of how that shit shook out. I mean, I stand in awe. Because it's a wonder that marriage lasted as long as it did. You know, the way Leon used to hold his hand out for the offering. Until then, your marriage was dope. So, who called it quits?
Theater Center's Playwright in residence. And I have to begin by asking you, why this play? Why a play that centers the love story of two women set in the context of a church parking lot, or the context of the church in general? Why was it important for you to tell this story?
I just did the cliche thing of saying this, that's all. Okay, so anyway, I was mentioning this the other night, I was that kid who grew up going to church every Sunday, and then when I got to that age where I began to understand there was something different in terms of like my sexuality, right? I then became that kid who would sit in church every Sunday and obsessively read all of the scriptures in the Bible that folks said that meant that I was going to burn in hell and possibly get AIDS, right? So I was that kid who like obsessively read that and trying to like reconcile what, at a very early age, what I was feeling and beginning to understand about myself with what folks in the church said about what that thing was that I was experiencing, but not actually having anyone to go to have any sort of conversation with to figure out what it was. And so it's weird that you start like going to those scriptures that say horrible things about you, but then in a weird way, that ultimately progressed to me finding other scriptures and beginning to want to, not even so much finding other scriptures, but finding other books about religion, about theology, about faith, to understand who I was in a certain kind of way, more perfectly. And so in many ways, I wrote I Am Delivered for those little kids sitting in church obsessively reading those scriptures on Sunday morning. And one more thing I'd love to say about the play is, someone once asked me why I chose Usher Board and not the choir, which is the most typical way that we think of when we think of the Black church experience. But for me, my parents were ushers. I was a junior usher. And the thing that's really interesting about ushers and usher boards in the Black church is that, particularly depending on the type of church that it is, my church, of course, Missionary Baptist Church, folks get happy, they shout, what have you. And so in that kind of environment, ushers have to be able to be physically fit. Right. In order to you gotta be physically fit. You gotta carry people out of church, get people, and chase after people, catch your babies, you got to do all of that. And then you also have to be able to care for folks when they're in the spirit, but make sure that you're not stopping them from being in the spirit. You want the spirit to continue, right? And what's interesting about that is that those things seem to be in contradiction with how oftentimes people in the church might view homosexuality. That we're A, not physically fit or just strong people, but then also that you're not just spiritually attuned enough to understand Spirit and Holy Spirit or higher being, and then also that your queerness repels a higher power from even being attracted to. And so it's really interesting to put that story in the body of mushrooms.
I love it. I love it. I want you, if you would, pass the mic to Pastor Lucretia, because Pastor Faison, I want to go to you, because just for our audience to understand, you pastor St. Paul United Methodist Church in downtown Dallas. You lead one of the oldest African-American congregations in the city, a church literally built by the formerly enslaved. Historically, as Commissioner Price said earlier, we understand that the Black church has been on the front lines, speaking truth to power, advocating for justice regarding all and any social, economic, and political challenges that has faced the Black community in the last 200 plus years. However, St. Paul is unique because it's also a congregation of the United Methodist Church, the nation's second largest Protestant denomination for now, because the organization is undergoing currently a split, largely over the inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons. And FYI, and interestingly enough, the last time the United Methodist Church split was over the issue of slavery. And so here we are again. It appears to me that you and your church sit at the intersection of the majority and the minoritized. Help us understand the conversation happening around gender, sexuality, and faith within this historic bastion of freedom that we know as the Black church, right? We talk a lot about the Black church and what it's done and who it is and what it's created. In my dissertation, I argue that the Black church is important to the development of democracy. The civil rights movement would not have happened without it. And so this democracy that we defend around the world is not Jeffersonian democracy. It is Selmian democracy. Because until 1965, unless you were white, wealthy, and a man, for the most part, you had full access to democracy. Otherwise, you didn't. And in large part, the scholarship says the Black church was the most important organizational hub of the civil rights movement. So here you are in a United Methodist church in a majority organization that is predominantly white, yet you're leading an African-American congregation while the organization is having this international conversation about gender and sexuality. Bring us into all that.
It's not hard. Pass the mic down.
Oh, it actually wasn't. Okay. I'm trying to remember everything that you said. It is a very interesting place to be. I would say that, and particularly with the issue of disaffiliation, having a lot to do, in particular, with ordination of queer clergy, because our discipline has language in it that pretty much prohibits that. Not just that, but also just says that homosexuality is not is incompatible with Christian teaching. And so that's the language that is at the heart of a lot of the debate, right? The interesting dynamic is when you talk about the Black church, in some ways, is how little this conversation is going on. And I'm not saying it's not, but we seem to be, and I can only speak for the church, for this district where we are, while I can't say there hasn't been any conversation, there is this ongoing reluctance to have this dialogue in the Black church. That hasn't changed, right? And so it's almost a don't ask, don't tell kind of situation. I had a conversation in our congregation about the disaffiliation process. Most of the African American churches that I'm aware of in our area are not disaffiliating, and there are several reasons for that. One, the perception that is pretty true in some instances that the group that is disaffiliating is a more conservative branch of the church, and there's some truth to that. The other thing, there's a financial aspect to it, right? But I think the other part of that is our reluctance to have this conversation. And I don't think that's new. It's an ongoing reluctance, fear, ways that Scripture has been interpreted and taught that interferes with, makes it difficult to have the conversation. And as a pastor, you try to come at it in a way where you're not, you can't, belief systems don't change easily, right? And sometimes being in your face, you pick and choose those moments, right? And the other thing is also you have to have that in the context, I believe, of relationship as well. So just getting to the point of being able to have this conversation in the Black church is still extremely difficult. Even when in the churches that say we want everyone to come, that's a statement, but living that as a reality in your congregation is very different. And I'm not sure that I've seen a good model of that, perhaps other than, and I don't want to name churches, I can think of one in particular, but I don't know that I've seen a good model of that in very many of our Black churches. I think those conversations are very different in our white church than in our African American churches. I think that the disaffiliation process has been more prominent, more of a conversation, has been more divisive in some ways, and I'm a bit, I've struggled with our inability or our unwillingness to discuss the elephant in the room. I don't know if I've answered anything that you asked me.
No, that's good. I want to come back to that, but first, let's go to Pastor Diaz on the end there. Pastor Diaz, you are the executive pastor of the largest LGBTQ plus congregation in the world. In the world. The Cathedral of Hope right here in Dallas, Texas. This particular congregation is close to my heart for a lot of reasons. Number one, we're in the same denomination, so we're in the same spiritual tribe. However, this particular church grew during the 1980s AIDS epidemic, where there would be 10 to 15, sometimes 20 funerals a week in the Dallas community. Sometimes members of the church, sometimes not. Because during those days, if you were dying with HIV or with AIDS, your family disowned you often. Sometimes funeral homes wouldn't even take the body. I mean, the history is not well known, but it's horrific. But here we have this particular congregation in this particular city and state. You personally also identify as queer or gay. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Your journey to ministry, how have you reconciled these identities? And what is it like in the big old gay church? Is it like other churches? Is it different? Is it the same? Tell us about the cathedral. And I say that lovingly because they call themselves, if you've ever been, the big old gay church, right?
My mother says the same thing, but you don't sound like my mother. She says a little different. So it's the big old gay church, and it was actually founded, right, as a predominantly affirming outreach to queer folk, right? It was really started not as a UCC, but as a metropolitan community church, but started in 1968, and then morphed and affiliated with the United Churches of Christ, and so it's always been predominantly, like right now we're about 75% queer, 25% affirming, right? More heterosexual. And then we have a Spanish congregation, which is also predominantly queer. And most of those are immigrants, they're undocumented, but also are looking for community, right? Membership of 1,400 right now. Right. Every church has got thousands of members. Our attendance is about 800 right now, and so we're grateful for that. God has been good, but even more than that, the people, right, are bringing in more folks in order to affirm love in their lives. So my particular journey, I grew up in Houston, Texas. Don't hate me, Dallas. Please don't hate me. And I grew up in an urban environment, and I was very much into music at the time. We grew up Catholic. We didn't really know a whole lot about other religions out there. But a cousin of mine, apparently she had the evangelical bug, and she invited us to a Pentecostal church. And I said, yeah, let's go. And to my amazement, right, when you walk in, there are people running around the church, right? People raising their hands, yelling, kids all over the place. And it was, for me, I could not get over the idea that a group of folks are so excited about God, right? I had never been exposed to that before, because usually you're in church, you got to be proper, right? You can't yell. You have to make sure you're being appropriate for church with your family. And so this was a new experience for me. And I said, I want to learn more about this. And so I kept going, and I ended up, giving my life to the Lord, if I can use that language. And my life was music, band, right? Marching band, jazz band. And when I wasn't in music, I was in church. And I drew my family, my mother, to church, right? I didn't have a car, so somebody had to drive. And so she took me out there, but it started this process, this sort of awakening of, wow, my whole life I've wanted to spread goodness, you could say. And here was this new goodness that I saw in the church. I ended up going to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a very charismatic school. And I remember my first Bible class when we were talking about redaction criticism and historical criticism. And I was like, I just want to save souls for Jesus, right? All of a sudden, this black and white religious world wasn't black and white anymore. There was a lot of gray. And folks in that space were acknowledging that this is gray, right? At Oral Roberts, a conservative undergraduate institution. And so it started this process, and there was a big debate going on in the Episcopal Church at the time. I started going to an Episcopal church because I was a little bit of a charismaniac out, I guess you could say. I started going to an Episcopal church, and they were going through the Bishop Gene Robinson debate, right? Up in the northeast of whether you could affirm a bishop who was openly gay and in a relationship. And I remember the vote. It was 180 to 2, and I was one of the two folks who voted not to disaffiliate from the Episcopal Church. But after that, I began to realize, now, if I'm okay with a gay queer bishop, what about me, right? And so that's when I began the process of, it's time for me to come out and be true to who I am. We always quote a scripture at Oral Roberts, in John 18, the truth will set you free, right? Those who abide in me, the truth will set you free. And the truth, once you learn it, it's liberating, right? The good news is the gospel is literally good news. And for me, it started this path of going to seminary. And at the Episcopal school, I tell you, the Episcopal seminarians, they were good people. I loved them, right? But the activists on campus were the MCC folks and the UCC folks. They came to chapel with a shirt that said, the church has AIDS, right? Unnerved the Episcopal church folks to death. My goodness. But I remember that. And I said, I don't know who these are, but I want to learn about their church. And I learned, and pretty soon I said, I want to be a part of this movement. And so that's how I ended up really affirming my call to ministry. And, you don't look back. It was around family, the social dynamics, right? When I first came out, my mother didn't say, oh my God, you're going to hell. It was, I wanted grandchildren. What are others going to think of me, right? The oldest of 10, she took care of the family, and so they had put her on this pedestal. And so that was the biggest thing. I didn't want to upset or disappoint the family, which is very common, right, in Latinx circles and Latinx families. And through conversations, it was difficult, but that was actually harder than the faith components.
You always make me want to preach, but I want to resist. You stir me up when you speak. Let's go now to Representative Jones, because I do want to hear from we're sitting in his district, by the way. Did you know that? So thank you for welcoming us to District 100. Representative Jones, in November of 2022, a year ago, you became one of 3 openly LGBTQ lawmakers in the state of Texas. and the first openly HIV positive Texas lawmaker. And correct me if I'm wrong, are you the first openly HIV positive African American state legislator in the country? In the country. How about that? Give him a hand for that. In addition, you are also the founder and CEO of the Southern Black Policy and Advocacy Network. So your work, both in nonprofit and in Austin, puts you right in the middle of underserved communities and in collaboration with community leaders, including leaders of faith. How have you managed any challenges engaging faith leaders in faith communities in your work? And has your sexuality or health status been an obstacle?
Great question. So first, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I realize everyone is clergy. I take that back. But I'm so glad. But I'm so glad to be a part of this conversation. Not only because it's important, because it's literally in my neighborhood. The house that I live in is less than a mile away. The house I grew up in is across the street from that house. And now I have the amazing opportunity to serve this area as state representative. But it definitely has been a journey to be able to get to this point. And when I think about the mindset that I had to be in to even run, for this office, and even think I could, win this and really get in, was something that took years to be able to get to a point of really being able to realize. And for me, I had to go away from Dallas, where I was raised, to be able to really find myself. Because I think it was mentioned several times, there is an acknowledgement that LGBTQ people of color particularly exist. They're here, we're here. But there is still a comfort sometimes when you talk about being the loud person of color in LGBTQ spaces, or being the LGBTQ person in people of color spaces. Both of those spaces sometimes feel like they want you to not exist. And when I was going through my process of getting ready to move to Washington, D.C., there was a couple of things that were going on. Kind of at the same time, life started happening really fast when I was in my early 20s. After I had went to college, I graduated from college, Texas A&M University, and moved back here in Dallas to be able to get my career started in public health. Particularly, I wanted to do the work of addressing the HIV/AIDS epidemic, because when I was studying, minority health disparities, community health in college, HIV was just one of those things that you saw all this information about, hypertension, about heart disease, about cancer, but when you kind of looked into HIV, it was kind of this like quiet conversation. And also navigating my own sexuality and thinking about, people that look like me and experience, life in this world like myself, being a young black gay man, there was even less being said about our stories when it comes to the impact of HIV/AIDS. And so I wanted to move back to Dallas and address the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and that's what I did in 2006. And so one of my first jobs here in Dallas was a local community-based organization that's still around, Abounding Prosperity. I came in, absolutely, give it up for Abounding Prosperity. That organization was just getting started, and I helped to write the first grants for the organization and started as director of community outreach. Also, what was happening, during that time was, preparing myself for being able to get ready to come out, because I'm thinking if I really want to do this work in HIV, I'm going to have to deal with my own stuff. And first at the top of that list was coming out. And so this is around 2007. The process of coming out was actually quite dramatic in my family. And it was definitely a process for me, but I'm thankful that now my family are some of my biggest advocates, but it came with challenges. And also coming from a family that I grew up in the church. I was definitely not only a youth usher, I was also a youth Sunday school teacher. I was in the youth choir, and I did everything I had to do when going to church. And so the actual church that I grew up going to is actually right up the street, Church of the Living God. And I started going there until my teens, and then started going to a family church in Corsicana, still a Church of the Living God, but in Corsicana because my uncle was the overseer. So again, fast forwarding back to my time of coming out and kind of getting my career started, that coming out story was traumatic. And on top of that, it was hard to navigate because only a few months later, I found out that I was HIV positive. And it was hard to go back to my family and have that conversation because there was already a rumor started in my family that I was HIV positive simply because I was gay. So that was a lot. And bringing it all kind of full circle to my work in addressing HIV and even finding out about my own HIV story, it really gave me the strength to start doing this work. One, internally for myself and using my advocacy as kind of a level of therapy. Now being somebody who's been living with HIV for 15 years, I've had a lot of therapy. And yes, and so this, the HIV work, I think about, we all have to think about the history of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and the fight that the epidemic took. It wasn't what we see now as far as the availability of resources, the acknowledgement of just the existence and the dignity of LGBTQ people or people living with HIV. And so going through my own HIV process really brought me full circle into my life, because as I was working on coming out, I was pulling out of Black spaces, including the church. I felt that I was going to leave it before it left me. So my church, sometimes my family, and just being away, and even my fraternity, and all these different things. And so when I moved back to Dallas, I really made the decision that I wanted to come back full circle. I didn't want to just go to DC and disappear. So when I came back, I started my nonprofit, the Southern Black Policy and Advocacy Network, working to address health outcomes in Black communities and taking the work that I learned in Washington, D.C. to bring that home, like my grandmother said, to take this work, go learn the work, but always remember to come back home and do great work. And also, I started to get involved in the community in a political sense that led me to be a state representative, because I continued to see issues in my community, particularly this community, that literally where you're sitting and what surrounds this area, years and years of neglect and the need to be able to do something about it. And so one thing that DC taught me was to own my power in that conversation, own my power in faith spaces, to be able to have this conversation, because even if people don't want to have the conversation, I do. And I'm ready to have the conversation, and I want to help build a group of people and be supported by a group of people that are ready to have those important conversations about how do we move our community and our society forward. And so just coming from that mindset was a space that really helped me navigate spaces like the faith community, because it's very important that we work on solutions together, and also I am a part of that community, and no one really has the ability to take me out of a space that I also own as well.
I think it's worth noting, sometimes I think the minoritized communities, Black and brown communities, the Black church, etc., sometimes we get a bad rap. And I used to think, well, having a theological education that helps you unpack the text is a privilege, and it's a privilege because it's a hefty expense. I'm still paying off. And you have to be taught how to not just read the text verbatim, but to unpack it. The fancy word we use in theological education is exegesis. You're right? Say that 3 times. And I used to think, well, sometimes that expense, that privilege, not having enough theologically trained pastors is the reason why there tends to be a bit more, as Pastor Faison said earlier, a bit more of a quieted conversation about sexuality. And I've since say, well, that may be part of it, but I think the larger issue is the ways in which minoritized bodies, black and brown bodies, have been sexualized through both slavery and colonialism. You don't have to scratch the surface very long into the history of colonialism throughout the world and through the history of slavery to recognize that sexualizing black bodies and brown bodies was a part of the playbook of how that history played out, and that tends to then make us a bit more sensitive. So it's just not issues of sexuality in my experience. I find it in minoritized communities, sexuality, sex, gender, period. Those conversations aren't had in open spaces, and I think some of that is residual from history. But what I would like for those church members and clergy persons to know is that outside of thinking about sexuality and outside of sexualizing the conversation, I'd like to center the conversation in authenticity. And when we look at this particular play, the tagline of I Am Delivered is, quote, celebrate the power of being your authentic self, end quote. So as faith leaders and public servants, how do you work to liberate others' authentic selves? Is that important to you? And this can be for anyone.
Yes, it is important. I think it begins with your own authenticity, right? That you bring that to the table. And so, to kind of go back to what I said earlier about people not wanting to have the conversation, my authentic self, I find those moments for that conversation. Occasionally, it's from the pulpit, particularly for me, it's not something that I force, but and one of the things I guess in my own authenticity is I want to be honest in who I am as a leader, as a preacher. And so when I stand at the Methodist table, United Methodist Communion table, which is an open table, when I define what open means, right? So I say this table, we have an open table. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter who you love, it doesn't matter what your gender is. So when I say those things, I'm being authentic to who I am, right? And I find in those moments that when I walk that line of my own authenticity and my own theological understanding, I don't experience, I'm waiting sometimes for the pushback, but it's not there. It's not there as much, or it invites conversation. So I think opening the door with my own authenticity begins to do that in a lot of ways, right? And letting people know in the church, I say a lot of times, this is the place for this conversation, right? This is the place. This is the place for us to talk about, like you said, sex, period. Can't we just say the S word in here? It's okay. To have that conversation, this is the right place for this conversation. Because God has given us this great gift, and God has given us the ability to use this gift in such a wonderful way. This is the right place for the conversation. So I think it begins with your own authenticity.
Say it again. God has given us what?
This wonderful gift.
Sex is a what, Pastor?
Yeah.
It's a gift. Can the church say amen? Okay, there you go. Somebody else, what do you think about this sense of being authentic and authenticity and liberating others to be?
So I think there are multiple ways. One of the most impactful ways that have been I've encountered is coming out of seminary, always expecting the church folks want simple answers, right? And so you got to give them what we learned, right? And for many folks, just getting it here isn't going to change things, right? They've got to get it in the heart first. And so being able to facilitate conversations, we're a church that's big into small groups, right? I'm big into them because I want to create space for people to share their experiences, but also what their current beliefs are, which is a scary thing even in progressive churches because you get folks from other churches who might be a bit conservative, right? But I remember this one time in our Spanish congregation, we did like a sexuality in the Bible, but more of a facilitated conversation. And many folks are, you know, they don't have many family members here, and so the family they do have, they rely upon them, right, for not just financial help, but for social affirmation. You know, they're family, so you want to feel supported. And I remember the whole topic of the conversation was about coming out right after reading the scriptures, and it was a great conversation, awesome. The next day, I get a call from one of the small group participants, and he says, Reverend Diaz, you know, in Spanish, I came out to my family. I did it after our conversation last night. And I was like, wait a minute here, let's think about this, you know? Like what happened? What did they say? Thankfully, they ended up having a loving conversation, but I think that's also the power, like giving folks an opportunity in a safe space, even in church, even at a queer church, because sometimes I think we just want to tell them what it is to believe, even the progressive beliefs. And so how do we nurture space for them to find out the truth of who they are?
I always think that if I could just get folks laughing, then I have a way in. You know? So, you know, for me, liberation or trying to help to liberate others is it's really an act of figuring out how to make yourself or share your vulnerability, but in a healthy and empowering way. And I guess it's how I feel about when I write, when I create plays. I can share my vulnerability, but in a healthy and empowering way. And particularly, especially when I am delivered, which the whole basically the title is I am delivered. You know, which if you know with the title, how many people in the audience are curious, are familiar with the genesis of the title? Some, and perhaps some not. Oh, you can tell, you talk better than I did.
The title, many people will recognize the title because the second largest African American denomination is the Churches of God in Christ. In fact, right now, they're in their global meeting in Memphis. It was one of those meetings in St. Louis in 2016, 17-ish, where, and this is a Pentecostal organization, and it tends to be far right in their theological stance. And so there had been a scathing sermon that most would deem to be anti-gay, and then an altar call, if you understand that language, if our audience understands that language, an altar call for those who struggle with the affliction of being gay to come and be delivered, to be set free, to be healed of this affliction. And so there was a gentleman that people who know him in St. Louis say he actually has some special needs, but that's just a tea I heard on Instagram. So don't take it for what it's worth. So he runs up. You have to look at it. It's on YouTube. It went viral. It literally went viral. It was on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. I mean, it was everywhere. And he became a laughing stock. That's the part that hurt my feelings about it. Because he ran up, maybe good intentioned, I don't know, and he declared to the world that he no longer liked men, that he liked women now, that he had been, in his St. Louis accent, I suppose, I have been delivered. And so our dear Jonathan has taken this viral moment and taken a moment that many people roll their eyes, some people criticize, some people, to be quite honest, winced in pain because it triggered them about their own experiences in church. Jonathan has taken that and flipped it on its head and invited all of us into this love story using that language. So, bravo to Jonathan for doing that. My last question, and then we're going to go to the audience for some questions. And audience, I want you to think about something that has perked your curiosity, something you want to know more about that the panelists have said, something about the play in general, or if there's some ways that your heart has been expanded, your understanding has been expanded during this conversation. We want to hear it. But before we go to the audience, I want to ask again for anyone who wants to jump in here. The final 2 words of I Am Delivered is welcome home. What does welcome home mean to you? And how does that meaning impact how you move through the world, in your work, in your ministry, in your life? What does home mean to you?
So I actually had an experience that's similar to Dr. Diaz in the sense of like you're doing something, you're in the act of doing something, but then in the act of doing that causes you to realize or to question, like, well, wait a minute, if I believe in this, then why do I believe in it, and why am I not putting myself out there and being open and being honest and investigating that? And so with Welcome Home, what's really meaningful about that for me is that, as you said, the final 2 words of the play, or Welcome Home, and it's when one of the 2 of the characters, both 2 young black queer men, are on stage at the end of the play. And one of them actually, tells the other welcome home, meaning welcome back to New Jerusalem. And you know, a big part, another part of why I wrote the play, or as I continued to work on the play, I began to feel this this thing pulling me in a certain direction, which was realizing or beginning to wonder, you know, what is it about the Black church experience, from my own experience, that even though there might at times be things that are problematic, which can exist in white churches, right? But there might be things that are problematic, and yet there's something about that experience. There's something about that communion that still is important to me and meaningful to me, and that you still see large numbers of LGBTQ plus Black folk in church on Sunday morning, right? Like, what is it about that experience that still brings us back to that place? And so I just really wanted to explore that. And for me, what that also meant was, I was like, so you're writing this play about this thing where at the end it says, welcome home, but you haven't been to church in like, what, how many years? So at this point, and so a few months ago, I just started going back and attending church frequently, like actually every Sunday. Which is big for me, like really big. And you know, there's so many, I attend St. Luke Community United Methodist Church. And you know, there are moments that are, I'm reminded of why I love St. Luke and what drew me there in the first place. And then there are also things that are triggering as well. But it is home, and there's something that I look forward to every Sunday morning. And then I know that there's something that whatever I'm dealing with, like for those 2 hours or so, 2 hours, right? Yeah, 2 hours or so. North Missionary was 3 hours. But I know that there's something that will be meaningful to me and push me forward in the week ahead.
When I think about welcome home, I think for me it's literally welcome home. And when I was speaking earlier about once upon a time there was a part of me that was pulling away from things that were literally me. And you kind of learn that, you know, as a survival mechanism, and you know, being gay, the church is not doing what it needs to do, leave the church. If your family's not doing what it do, go find your chosen family. Like it's always about the fight or flight. And so going through that process and literally, you know, leaving from Dallas to Washington, D.C. because I felt so smothered by Dallas and what Dallas wanted me to be. I wasn't a state representative then, but I was a community leader and working with all these expectations around me. And so I left and stayed gone for a decade. And literally coming back, Welcome Home, has been all the spaces that I thought that because I made the decision to not only come out as a gay man, but I then went past that to talk about my HIV, when even people in my own community would tell me, just keep that a little bit quiet. Like, do you really, like, why do you have to talk about being gay and being a state representative? Why do you have to talk about being HIV positive? But those things are my story, and anybody who's running for office or in leadership would tell their story. And so coming back home, back to the church I grew up in that I wasn't, there for years, back to, the communities that I once thought that in order for me to get away, I had to go to Oak Lawn versus finding at home in Oak Cliff. And coming back to be able to not only be accepted, but to be able to now run for office. And I think that's huge, because a younger version of myself would never think that my own story would even be possible. And so being able to come back home, being able to do the work that my young self always wanted to do, but that thing called life started happening. And those doubts started coming in, and that fear in your head about what are they going to think of me? Are they going to accept me? Are they going to love me? Let me protect myself. Let me become something that can survive this. And now being able to come back home has been so rewarding. And I only hope that we continue to address the things that make those young LGBTQ people feel that they need to run. And really see them at an earlier age so that they can really be able to see themselves, because there's it doesn't fall on deaf ears, just the rates of suicide that happens because of young people not being in that space of their faith community accepting them, their families accepting them and giving them everything that they need to be able to thrive. So I'm happy to be home and happy to be doing the work to help harvest that land for another group of young people to be able to grow up in a better space and world than I had to come up in, and the people before me had to come up in, and the shoulders that we all stand on to be able to be in this public forum, having this very important conversation that used to be conversations that were silenced, and even as we look at the legislative process right now, are still trying to be silent. Because no matter how far we've come, we're still in a legislative session or coming out of a legislative session where there was over 140 bills working to target LGBTQ people, where we're not only attacking women in the legislative body, but we're attacking LGBTQ people and their families, particularly our most vulnerable, their children. And doing that level of harm, and all those things are still happening. So no matter how comfortable that we got in the last 10 years with all the movement in LGBTQ equality, it's also a reminder that we still have to fight for our future and fight for the future of people coming after us.
I guess as a faith leader, when I think of welcome home, I think of what home means. Your home is typically, or should be, that place where you feel safe. That place where you can be your authentic self. That's what home is for me. When I go home, I'm truly myself, and there's an ease and a peace with that. And that is my hope and desire, that the church would be, at its best, that place where people feel safe and welcome and accepted and loved. And I jokingly but seriously say sometimes we do our best faking at church, right? But as a faith leader, one of the things that I strive to lead our church to be, our vision statement says that we love all people, body and soul, which means we want to love people in a holistic way. We want to minister to the whole person. And when we say that, then that has to mean everybody. That has to mean all. There can be no exceptions or qualifiers around that. I'm always saying you need a church home, right? You need a place. You need a place to be where you have a church family who will walk with you and be with you. Then we have to be that. And so I think that means to me that we continue to work for that, because there's still some dysfunction in the family, but because we're not perfect. But I think that we can work to create that and encourage that, and hopefully live that, so that when people come to the church, that place that for the Black community has been that center of our community, that anchor, from the civil rights to just the place where we felt safe. When we weren't safe out in the world, we were safe and we were somebody, right? That we still need to offer that, and to do it without any strings attached. And quit making it so hard for people to just be themselves, where they feel like they have to hide and pretend. I am so tired of that. I want people to be able to just be who you are and not apologize for it, and be loved, because that's what God has called us to do. So home is safety and love and acceptance, and that is God's ideal, I believe, for the church.
Anything you want to say to these good folks who've come out to support the work you're doing? You get the final word.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to have the final word, I will say, please be sure to join us at Dallas Theater Center, February 2nd to the 18th, for I Am Delivered. This is a play that, more than just being a play for me, the experience of writing the play and reaching out to folks, such as this amazing panelist that we have, and reaching out to the community, has been an empowering experience, and also sometimes a really challenging experience. So, but really moving. The play is really funny. The scene is really funny. There's a lot of there's maybe some edible. You don't see the edibles in this scene, but a lot of really cool stuff. It's a great play. I truly encourage you to check it out this February. And also, we have a great group of ambassadors who have been supporting the work that we do for I Am Delivered. They're in the program, and I just want to shout them out. And I can't shout them all out by name right now, but I just want to thank you and know that I really appreciate everything you do.
I just had a great idea, and maybe if Kevin is still here, he can tell me if it's possible. If people who are attending tonight say, this, I believe in this work, I believe in this conversation, I believe in this art, and they are persons who have been blessed with means, could they say buy 10 tickets, 20 tickets for little Rays and little Jonathans and little Vintons and little Michaels out there who are growing up knowing themselves to be who they are, yet they're in a church that maybe does or does not understand them? Could someone gift tickets and we find a way to get those tickets to folks? I would be willing to help do that. If there was someone in the audience who wanted to buy tickets for young people, I'd be willing to help get those tickets to those young people. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Okay, fantastic. Well, after that, let's end with the art itself. Oh, we had questions. You all were going to ask questions, right? So we're going to have this, and then we want to get your questions. Okay.
The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. I knew it was too good to be true. Who am I to deserve happiness?
Oh, don't say that. I don't like hearing you talk like that.
I should have just stayed in my lane. Some roughneck side piece who fills in when the baby mama starts asking for money again. That's me. That's my lane.
You better than that.
I guess I just expected more. He made me feel different. I thought he was different. A God-fearing church boy. A step in the right direction. I feel like they're all rejoicing at my heartache, laughing at the stupid little punk who thought he could be one of them. I guess I never really belonged here.
You're just as good, if not better. Square business. And New Jerusalem is where you belong. Don't let nobody make you feel less than. They tried that same bullshit with me. Soon as I got here, some chick started talking about how she saw me shoot a dude in the kneecaps outside the cliff.
Folks told lies on me too when I joined New Jerusalem.
No, she wasn't lying. She actually saw me shoot a dude in the kneecaps outside the
Damn.
But I was in a dark place. Barely 19, and I had the devil on my tail. I thought I could outrun him. My play mama tried to warn me, but I didn't listen until it was too late. Almost cost me my life.
Is that how you got those burns?
Yeah, been to hell and back. But by the grace of God, I found my way to New Jerusalem. And don't you know the devil tried to follow me here too? Ooh, church folks kept throwing my past up in my face, talking about how I used to sling rock and sow poison to my own people. None of it was lies. But it was also none of their goddamn business. Treated me worse than trash. Dragged my name through the mud and started spreading horrible rumors. And as soon as any woman just damn smiled at me, whew, the devil didn't want me here. He wanted me back out there in the streets, and he almost won. They almost run me off. But one somebody reached out to me. Sister Evelyn McCarthy, president of the Usher Board #1. She was the best damn usher to ever walk the floor of New Jerusalem. And she said she saw something in me. Said I was a soldier. And she was going to make me a soldier in the army of the Lord. And that's just what she did. And here I stand. The Sister McCarthy kept hanging with me. She never let me give up on myself. After a while, I stopped caring about what people said, because when I stood on that floor, I was wearing an armor.
The full armor of God.
Yeah. Sister McCarthy gave me that. Usher Board gave me that. New Jerusalem gave me that. In spite of itself, sometimes it's those unintended blessings that carry the most power. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. But as for you, yea, though evil thought against me, but God meant unto good, to bring to pass, as in this day, to save much people alive. The good mixed with some bad is fuel that you need to survive.